Hello, my name is Jessica and I'm here today to talk to you about classic books that I love and classic books that I do not love so much. So I have read a lot of classic books. I have an English degree and I also have taught a lot of classic novels and I love them. And I know that a lot of people are intimidated by them or think that they're boring and just want to stick to YA, and that's completely fine, but I am here to give you some options for books that you might be interested in. I'm going to try to recommend some that I feel like people who really like young adult literature, like dystopian or fantasy or contemporary would like, and hopefully maybe you'll find something that you want to read out of this, or maybe you know a lot about classic literature and just want to hear someone else's perspective about it. I will say that not all of these are like in the canon. There's not one person sitting in a room somewhere deciding what is classic literature and what isn't. It just kind of happens over time. So a couple of these I'm kind of like predicting are going to be known as classics in years, but they're not necessarily right now. So just keep that in mind, that I'm not like going off an official list of what is a classic and what isn't. So I'm going to start with my favorites and then get into my least favorites. I have way more favorites than I do least favorites, so we'll get right into it. So I'm going to start with books that I think that everyone should read, especially in today's political climate. One of them is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I have like 101 copies of this book. I do not know how. But this is a book about a society in which books have been banned. They have firemen in the society whose only job is to burn books. Like if they discover that someone owns a book, they're supposed to go over and burn it. The government is very controlling, obviously, and wants to keep information under control. So the protagonist in this novel, his name is Guy Montag. What's interesting about Guy is that while he is one of these firemen, he also discovers a love for reading and books. He has a conflict because he's supposed to destroy books, but he also really wants to read them and wants to know what's inside of them and what they have to offer to him. He meets a neighbor girl named Clarice who kind of also helps him open up his eyes to this new undiscovered world and how wrong this government is. So this is one of my favorite dystopians. I love teaching this book because it really teaches the importance of having information available to you and how lucky we are to be able to read different ideas and share different ideas through books. So that's one of my favorite dystopians. My all-time favorite is 1984, and somehow I do not have a copy of it, but Orwell's 1984 is like the ultimate dystopian novel. 1984 is about a society where Big Brother is watching. If you've heard that phrase, Big Brother, it comes from 1984. So just like the TV show Big Brother, there's always a camera on you. You're always being watched no matter what, even in your home. Information is very limited. There's no free speech. There's even like thought crimes. You can get in trouble for thinking certain things. Basically, the government decides what is true and what isn't true. And I see so much of this happening in today's society, and I just wish that everyone would read 1984 so they could see it too. Because that's one of those important novels where like you start seeing signs of things happening and you recognize, I've read about this type of society, I don't want to live in that society, so I'm going to do something to stop it before it grows worse. It's also interesting seeing what Orwell predicted and what came true. Obviously it's past 1984, but things keep happening that he predicted. So it's really an interesting book. I'm gonna try not to say interesting so much because I say it a lot, I feel like. The Handmaid's Tale is another dystopian novel that I love. I still haven't watched the Hulu series yet, but I'm planning on it. The Handmaid's Tale is about a woman named Offred, and she is a handmaid, so her job is basically to get pregnant and have children for the men of the upper society. So these men have wives, but it's not their job to get pregnant, so pregnancy is kind of seen as like a servant's job. What's really cool about this book is that it starts out and you think it's in this like primitive time, and then you realize that this happened after modern society. So there are all these references to regular school and like electronics and just all of these things that you associate with modern society, and you realize that something really bad happened to this government and it could potentially happen to our government as well. So again, another warning to our society, another really good book. This next one is actually a play. Arthur Miller's The Crucible is one of my all-time favorites. I read this in probably 2 hours the first time I read it. It's a really quick read. The Crucible is about the Salem witch trials. Arthur Miller took some of the documents from the Salem witch trials and kind of created a fictitious version of what he saw happened. So some of the names and some of the events are accurate to the time, but he took all of that information and kind of made his own story about it. This play is about a group of girls who were caught in the forest doing witchcraft. They were having fun with one of the servants, making potions, casting spells. One of them was dancing naked and they got caught, so they had to think of a way out of it, and therefore started blaming people for bewitching them. This is what started the Salem witch trials basically in this play. One of the main characters, John Proctor, is known as a good man in the society. He's a hard worker, he stands up for what he believes in, but he is accused of witchcraft and he does not want to admit to it. So basically they have two choices. They can either admit to witchcraft and have their reputation tarnished for their entire lives, or they could say that they are not guilty and be hanged for witchcraft, but their name would not have that connected to it. They would go to the grave with kind of a clean slate because they never admitted being a witch. What I really like about this play is the importance of your name. When people hear your name, you want them to think good things. You want to have a good reputation. You want everything you do to reflect on, and that is a really important theme of this play. The next book I have is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This is another really easy, quick read. If you liked Lost, you might like this book. It's not exactly the same, but it is about a plane crash on a deserted island. So the people who ended up on this island were a group of British schoolboys. The pilot ends up dying and the boys are left to fend for themselves. They have to learn how to survive, and I would say they are, I think the oldest boys are probably around 13 years old. What I really like about this book is that it shows that there's a monster inside of all of us. Sometimes the monsters are a little bit bigger, a little more savage, but we all have that inside of us. Even if we are raised in a super prim and proper society, faced with this type of situation, some sort of savagery will come out. This book is really cool. It's again a really quick read, a really easy read, and you'll be thinking about it for a long time after you read it. Next, I want to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is one of the first YA novels, and the reason it's a YA novel is because the protagonist is a young girl. This is a coming-of-age story about a girl named Scout. Her father, Atticus, is a lawyer, and what I love about this novel is that it's told through the perspective of a child. So you see this really important, significant court case through the eyes of a child. So you recognize how important it is, but it's not necessarily stated in the book. And you get a reminder of the innocence of childhood. And one of the themes of the book is that racism is learned. And that, of course, is always relevant in our society. That is why I feel like it's still a really important book. Another easy read. It is a little bit longer, but it's written really well and it's a fun read. Let's get into some Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. I do not love all Shakespeare, as you'll see soon, but I do love Shakespeare. It's one of those things when you start reading it, it seems really, really overwhelming, but the ideas are so easily translated to our society that it's crazy. My favorite to teach is Romeo and Juliet. I have taught Romeo and Juliet 4 or 5 times and it's still my favorite. And what I love about it is the first time I read it when I was in 9th grade, I was smitten. Let me show you. This is actually my copy from 9th grade. I would just sit in my bed and read and reread the balcony scene, and I thought it was the most romantic thing I had ever read. I think this is the scene where Romeo and Juliet decide they're going to get married, and Juliet is waiting for some kind of sign that Romeo got it all set up. I was in love. And then what was interesting is that throughout the years, as I got older and as I had some of my own relationships and my own experience with love, my thoughts about this play shifted, but I didn't like it any less. I just saw it differently. And that's what I really love about it, is that young teens are gonna read this book and they are going to probably most likely pick up on the romance of it. And then adults are gonna read this play and they're going to see how hasty and how mistake-riddled these two's plans are. And that's what I love about it. It is not, I wouldn't say it's my favorite Shakespeare play, but I do love it. It's a classic. It's one of those plays that is referenced everywhere throughout our society, so it's good to know about. My favorite Shakespeare play is King Lear. King Lear is a play about a king named Lear, and he has 3 daughters. He is growing older, and so he decides to divide up his kingdom into 3 equal parts and give them to his daughters. But first he asks them each to tell him how much they love him as kind of a test. And the first 2 daughters are over dramatic in their expression of love for him. Obviously, they think they're gonna get a little bit more if they say that they love him more. And then the 3rd daughter is very honest about how much she loves him, very sincere. But since he is used to people fawning over him, he becomes enraged with her and kicks her out of the kingdom, kind of disowns her. So this play is about King Lear discovering what a mistake he's made. It's about the older 2 daughters kind of ruining his life, and then the younger daughter finding love and her journey outside of her father's kingdom. There's also another storyline about 2 brothers that's also very interesting, but this is my favorite Shakespeare play. So if you're interested in picking up a Shakespeare play, this is a good one to read. My next favorite is Night by Elie Wiesel. If you have not read this autobiography yet, you need to read it. Elie Wiesel was a boy from Transylvania who actually got sent to 2 different death camps during the Holocaust because he and his family were Jewish. He was sent to Auschwitz and then Buchenwald, and this story recounts his experience throughout his time in the Holocaust. I did read somewhere that the original untranslated first draft was a lot more angry and bitter, and sort of throughout time, throughout translations and drafts, it became what it is today. That's important to know about this book because one question I did have when I first read it was, how is he so forgiving? And I think it's important to know that he wasn't in the beginning, because there are a lot of really terrible things that happen throughout this novel, but the reason that we still read it is so that it won't happen again. He actually gets to stay with his father throughout much of the Holocaust, and that is kind of what gives him the motivation to survive and keep going. But the things that happened to him and his father and his family and those around him are horrifying. In order for nothing like that to happen again, we have to remember that it did happen in the first place. And that's why this is one of my recommendations. Another is Anne Frank's diary, her autobiography. Obviously, she did not make it out of the Holocaust, which is heartbreaking, but that is a great one, especially for younger children to start with. I feel like this is for a little bit older audience. And then another one that I really enjoyed, I didn't enjoy hearing about all the terrible things, but I thought it was a really important book, was One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. This is also set in World War II. It's about a Russian soldier who is wrongfully convicted of treason and sent to a Siberian work camp, and it recounts his experience there. I think it's important to remember that while millions of people died in places like Austria and Germany, a ton of people died in Russia as well, and this is a really great short book about what was happening in Russia at that time. Oh, Russia. On to happier books. I love Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I remember reading Jane Eyre in high school, and I would stay up late reading it, and there are some pretty scary parts, and there are entertaining parts, and there are like love scenes, and I just loved it. It is a longer book. There are slower parts, but it's worth it because I feel like it's one of the first books that had a feminist edge to it. Jane is someone who is not afraid to live on her own. She's not afraid to be herself. She's educated, she's smart, she's been through a lot in her life, and she recognizes that she's an independent lady, basically. It does get a little bit creepy, but that makes it even more fun to read. Similarly, Jane Austen was before her time. I picked out Northanger Abbey, but I love all of Jane Austen's novels. Again, they're not for everyone. They're a little bit slower, a little bit more difficult to read, but once you get into it, they're super funny, super witty, and they have really strong female characters. This society was crazy. Like, I would not survive in this society because it's all about getting married off, social status, and I can't. The next book is A Mercy by Toni Morrison. This is one that's not necessarily a classic yet, but it's going to be. A Mercy is about slave trade in the late 1600s in America. It has a few main characters and they're different types of people. We have slaves, we have people who deal with slaves, or that's like their profession, and it's heartbreaking, it's interesting, it's revealing. It's one of those books that you read and you think back on like what your ancestors were doing at this time and if they could have possibly been in situations like this. At its core, it's a mother-daughter story, but there are a lot of other characters that surround it. Overall, it's a really interesting, fun read. I said interesting again. It's a really fun read though, and it's not boring. I'll tell you that. It is not boring. If you are at all interested in magical realism, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez is the book for you. If you do not mind a million characters who are named super similarly, then you will really enjoy this book. This book is about a town named Macondo, and it follows a certain family throughout several generations. It follows the Buendia family throughout several generations, and it is just fascinating seeing, if you're interested in that, like family lineage and history and how people grow over time and how family stories are passed down, this is the book for you. It's also, like I said, magical realism, so there are elements in there that are kind of supernatural, and it makes it fun to read. This is a longer one, and it does take a little bit longer to read, and you might have to make a character chart to figure out everyone's names. I think this one actually has one in it. Yeah, it has kind of like a family tree in it. But it's worth it. On the back it says it should be required reading for the entire human race, so get to it. I won't talk a lot about this book because I know I talk about it a lot, but the Poisonwood Bible is one of my all-time favorites. It is a novel about a family from Georgia. In the late 1950s, they go over to the Congo in Africa as a missionary family. They set up a church in this small village, and they quickly start realizing that everything they thought was true, everything they thought was right, isn't necessarily right. What I love about this book is that it's told in multiple perspectives, and it takes you from, like, I'm from Georgia, this is an environment that I'm very familiar with, and it takes you into a completely different environment, and it's just interesting to see those people in that type of world and how it changes them and changes their perspective. My second to last one, I can't believe I do not have a copy of this right now. It is The Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald. This is one of my all-time favorite books. Some people write this book off, but I think it is a brilliant book. One of the reasons is that you don't love the characters and you don't hate them. There's something to like and dislike about every single character, and just when you feel like you're figuring out a character, they do something that makes you question them again. By the end of the novel, you still don't know, like, do I like this person? Do I not like this person? Did they make the right decision? It's also really, really beautifully written and so fun to read. A lot of you have probably already seen the movie. The book is very similar, but it's still worth reading for sure. My last one is another controversial one. People either love it or hate it, I feel like. But this is As I Lay Dying by Faulkner. What I love about this book, first of all, it is told in multiple perspectives, which I really appreciate because I love peeking inside of different characters' minds. The other thing I love about it is it's told in stream of consciousness, which means that just whatever was on the character's mind is poured onto the page, even if it doesn't make sense. So this novel is about the Bundren family. Their mother, the matriarch of the family, Addie, has died and they have to travel across Mississippi to bury her. This family is kind of crazy and you don't really know who to trust and who not to trust. And this is another book where you feel like once you figure them out, the end completely flips everything that you thought and you have to look back and say, was I completely wrong about my judgment? So that's what I really like about this book. This is the stack of classic books that I do not love. I do have more than this, but honestly, I love more books than I don't love. So the first is The Scarlet Letter. While there are things about this book that I really like, there are also things that I do not like. And one of those things is that the overall message in the end is that even if you've made mistakes in the past, if you find a man and get married, it's okay. Your life will be okay. I don't really like that. It's a lot of women shaming. Obviously, this woman, Hester Prynne, has to wear an A on her chest, a red A that stands for adultery, because she becomes pregnant outside of marriage. So it starts out a little hopeful. Like, she's a strong woman. She provides for her and her daughter. She has to live with this shame, this public perception of her. But then it kind of goes off. I would say you should read it. You should definitely read it and make your own judgment. I just think it's a little bit ridiculous. But it is a good book. It's well written. The next book is The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. This is the only book that I read in high school that I remember nothing about because it was that boring. I feel like this is one that I'm gonna have to reread to see if I actually like it once I give it a fair shot. But what I remember from it is that I couldn't get into it at all. So let me know if you've read this and like it because I might give it another shot. What I probably won't give another shot to is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I think a lot of people know the premise of Walden. This man moves out into the wilderness and writes about being away from modern society and living in nature and the importance of nature and transcendentalism, and it's super important and I get it. I just don't want to read it again. It was super dull. I think that ideas that came out of it are significant and I think that people enjoy it. I am just not that person and that's okay. The next book I did not like is Julius Caesar. This is actually a play. This is the No Fear Shakespeare version because I taught this book and I would provide some of the translated scenes. This play is okay until like, I think it's Act 3. It goes on for way too long. It's important, it's a history, I get it. I thought it was boring. One that I do not have here is Watership Down. Watership Down is a book about rabbits, literally. And in the preface, the author talks about how it's not an allegory, that it's not supposed to mimic anything in our society, that he's not talking about bigger issues, it's just about rabbits. And from that point, I was kind of like, yeah, but it has to be. Like, if you're anthropomorphizing rabbits, if you're making them into humans, it has to be an allegory, right? Beyond that, I couldn't get through it because it was just kind of boring. To me, it seemed boring. I know a lot of people like it, but meh. Another one I do not have here that's kind of controversial because a lot of people love it is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. While I appreciate that Mary Shelley took this risk and wrote this super scary story, it's just, if I could cut out all the scenes about nature, I'm not saying they're not important, they're important. If I could cut them out and just have everything be about the monster, yes, I would love the book, but it just goes on for too long. It's super important. I think that everyone should be exposed to the ideas in it. I just think the way that it was written was a little bit unnecessary. People might disagree with me, and that's fine. I've read it twice. I liked it the first time. The second time I didn't as much, and I feel like it was because I was older and I was really invested in it and thinking that I was gonna love it, and I didn't. My last one that I did not love is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. When you look at this book, you think, oh, I'm gonna read this in one sitting. I had to read this in high school and in college, and I hated it both times. This is another book that I feel like I should reread, and I might like it better now, but it's about a man who goes up the Congo River. He is on a Belgian trading ship with like ivory dealers, and the closer they get to the heart of the Congo, the more dark and mysterious it gets, and the more out of place they are. It's all about corruption and imperialism, things that I'm interested in normally. It's just not my favorite written book, but the ideas in it, again, are important and should be remembered. So that is it. Those are my favorite and least favorite classic novels. I'd probably left some out, but that's okay because this was the longest video I have ever filmed. It's something I'm passionate about, so I'm excited that I finally got it done, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any favorites or least favorites that I did not include. I would love to hear about it. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you again next time.